"Will you walk me to school?" the little girl asked a grumpy CEO millionaire who lived next door. Mr. Harris was a man who seemed to have everything a person could want. He was a CEO of a large company, a millionaire who owned fancy cars and a huge mansion. To the world outside, he was the picture of success. But to the people who lived near him, he was something very different. He was known as the grumpy man on the street. He hardly ever smiled, never joined in neighborhood gatherings, and preferred to stay behind the tall gates of his home. Some of the neighbors even whispered that he liked it better that way, cut off from everyone else. When he moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood, many of the families were curious about him. Some hoped that such a successful man would bring new energy or at least some prestige to the community. But they soon discovered he kept to himself. His routine was almost like a clock. He left early every morning in his sleek black car, and he returned late in the evening, carrying the stress of long meetings on his face. He walked quickly, eyes down, never pausing for a friendly word. Children often looked at him with a mix of fear and wonder, because there was something very cold about him. Living right next door to his mansion was a small, cozy house. It belonged to Mrs. Wilson, a young widow, and her 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Their home was the opposite of Mr. Harris's. It was simple but full of life. Bright flowers bloomed in the garden, and laughter could often be heard drifting through the windows. Mrs. Wilson worked hard to raise Lily on her own, and though money was sometimes tight, she made sure her daughter never lacked love. Lily was a curious and cheerful girl. She loved making new friends and talking to anyone who would listen. Her big brown eyes and bright smile made people feel lighter around her. Every morning, she would put on her little backpack and wait by the front gate for her school bus. Her mother usually stood with her, but on some days when Mrs. Wilson was rushing to get ready for work, Lily would stand there alone for a few minutes. It was during one of these mornings that something unexpected happened. Mr. Harris was walking down his driveway, dressed in a sharp gray suit, his face buried in his phone as usual. He glanced briefly at the street, and that was when Lily spotted him. Without hesitation, she called out in her small, sweet voice, "Good morning, mister." He looked up, surprised, but said nothing. He gave a small nod and returned his attention to his phone. Most people would have left it at that, but Lily was not like most people. The next morning, she tried again. "Good morning, mister. Are you going to work?" she asked, her voice bright and friendly. Mr. Harris paused, slightly annoyed. He was not used to being questioned by children, especially so early in the morning. "Yes," he said shortly, and kept walking. But Lily was not discouraged. She simply smiled and said, "Okay, have a good day." And then came the morning that would change everything. The sun had just risen, and the air was crisp with the smell of fresh dew. Lily stood at her usual spot, swinging her backpack straps back and forth. When Mr. Harris stepped out of his gate, she looked up at him and asked with complete innocence, "Will you walk me to school?" The question stopped him in his tracks. He blinked at her, unsure if he had heard correctly. Nobody ever asked him for something so simple, so personal. People usually wanted business advice, money, or favors. But here was this little girl, asking him to walk her to school. For a moment, he almost laughed at the absurdity. "No, I don't. I don't do that," he muttered, shaking his head. His voice was cold, but deep inside, he felt something stir. Lily just shrugged, as if it wasn't a big deal, and went back to humming to herself. That day at the office, Mr. Harris couldn't focus properly. During meetings, his mind kept drifting back to the tiny voice asking, "Will you walk me to school?" He told himself it was ridiculous, just a child being playful. But the request had somehow touched a hidden part of him, one he had locked away for years. You see, Mr. Harris had once been a little boy too. A boy who used to walk to school alone most days because his parents were always too busy. His father had been building his own business, and his mother had been preoccupied with social events. Mr. Harris had learned early on that if he wanted to get somewhere, he had to rely on himself. Over time, he had grown tough, independent, and eventually wealthy. But that toughness had cost him his warmth, his ability to connect with people in simple ways. The next few mornings, Lily continued greeting him. Sometimes she asked small questions like, "Do you like chocolate ice cream?" or "Why do you wear the same kind of tie every day?" He rarely answered, but he found himself listening, even if he pretended not to care. Her voice was cheerful, unafraid, and full of life. It reminded him of something he had lost long ago. One morning, Lily's backpack looked especially heavy. She was struggling to adjust the straps when she nearly tripped over the curb. Instinctively, Mr. Harris reached out and steadied her. Their eyes met for a second, her wide and thankful, his surprised and awkward. She grinned and said, "Thank you, mister. You're stronger than you look." He almost smiled at that, though he quickly cleared his throat and looked away. He told himself it didn't matter, that he had a busy day ahead, important deals to sign. But as he walked to his car, he couldn't help but feel the warmth of that small moment. The neighborhood started to notice too. Parents whispered to each other about how the grumpy CEO seemed to pause at the gate more often, exchanging small words with the little girl. Children giggled and wondered what the strange man and their friend Lily talked about. It was unusual, even odd, to see such a serious businessman being drawn into a child's world, even if only for a few minutes each morning. Inside his mansion, Mr. Harris remained the same, quiet, alone, surrounded by luxury that didn't bring comfort. But when he stepped outside and heard Lily's cheerful good morning, something in him shifted. It was as though her words cracked the walls he had built around himself. By the end of the week, he found himself slowing his steps whenever he saw her waiting. She would chatter about her school, her favorite teacher, or the song she was learning. He still answered very little, but his silence no longer felt as heavy. It felt like listening, really listening, to someone who saw the world differently. And though he never admitted it to anyone, not even to himself, Mr. Harris began to look forward to those small encounters each morning. Because in her innocent request, "Will you walk me to school?" there was something he had been missing all his life, a chance to be needed, not for his money or his power, but simply for who he was. The days went by, and Lily's cheerful greetings became a small but steady part of Mr. Harris's morning routine. At first, he thought it was nothing, just a child being talkative. But slowly, he noticed how her voice seemed to echo in his head long after he drove away in his car. One Monday morning, he stepped outside to find Lily standing at the bus stop again. Her backpack looked even bigger than her, and she was trying hard not to let it slip off her shoulder. She noticed him right away. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," she called out with the brightest smile. He paused for a moment. Usually, he would just nod and keep walking, but this time, he replied softly, "Good morning." The simple word felt strange in his mouth. He had said those words countless times in business meetings, at company events, or to people he barely cared for. But somehow, saying it to this little girl felt different, almost new. Lily giggled, as if she had just won a prize. "You said it back," she exclaimed. "I told Mommy you would one day." Mr. Harris felt a flicker of embarrassment, though he didn't show it. He adjusted his tie, pretending it was no big deal, but inside, a small warmth spread through him. Over the next few mornings, their short exchanges grew. Lily would ask about the weather, point out the flowers in his yard, or tell him what she was learning in school. She seemed to have an endless supply of things to talk about. One morning, she asked, "Why do you always walk so fast? You look like you're running from something." He was caught off guard. No one had ever dared ask him such a personal-sounding question. He gave a short reply, "I'm just busy." But Lily tilted her head, not satisfied. Busy for what? He hesitated. Work. She nodded seriously, as though she understood, then grinned. Work must be really important. But you know what's important for me? Learning how to spell elephant. It's so tricky. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Harris chuckled. It was quiet and brief, but it surprised even him. Lily laughed too, proud that she had made the grumpy man laugh. The neighborhood noticed these changes. Parents began whispering to each other, amused by the unlikely bond forming between the stern CEO and the little girl next door. Some found it heartwarming, others simply shook their heads in disbelief. Still, Mr. Harris tried to keep his distance. He reminded himself that he didn't have time for such things. He was a man of strict schedules. He had meetings lined up from morning to evening, reports to read, calls to attend, and decisions to make that affected hundreds of employees. Walking a child to school was not part of his life plan. But Lily had other ideas. One morning, her mother was running late for work, and Lily was left standing at the gate a little longer than usual. The school bus hadn't arrived yet, and she looked around nervously. That was when Mr. Harris stepped outside. He was about to head to his car when he noticed her tiny figure shifting her backpack from one shoulder to the other. Something about the sight made him pause. For a moment, he saw himself small, alone, waiting for someone who never came. Without thinking, he walked over. "Your backpack looks heavy," he said in his deep, serious voice. Lily's eyes widened in surprise, then lit up with joy. "It is. Do you want to hold it?" she asked playfully. He frowned slightly. "I don't carry school bags." She shrugged and grinned, as if she expected that answer. "That's okay. Will you walk me to the corner then?" "Just the corner?" Her request hung in the air. He hesitated. It felt strange, almost awkward, but for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself nodding. "Just the corner," he repeated firmly. Lily clapped her hands together in delight, and the two began walking side by side. She skipped a little, humming a tune, while Mr. Harris kept his long, steady steps. He looked straight ahead, but his ears caught every word she said about her teacher, her best friend, and the drawing she made in art class. When they reached the corner, she waved at him and said, "Thank you, Mr. Harris. That was fun." He gave a stiff nod, turned, and walked back toward his car. But deep inside, he felt something unusual, a small piece of calm, as if the weight he always carried had lightened just a little. The next day, she asked again. This time, she wanted him to walk her halfway. And though he told himself he shouldn't make it a habit, he agreed. Soon, it became something of a pattern. Not every day, but often enough, Lily and Mr. Harris walked together for a short while in the mornings. To him, it felt like a small duty, but to her, it was the highlight of her day. During one of these walks, Lily looked up at him and asked, "Do you have any children?" The question hit him like a stone. He cleared his throat and shook his head. "No, why not?" she asked innocently. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "I was too busy with work." Lily frowned thoughtfully. "But work won't hug you when you're sad," she said simply. The words stayed with him long after she had hopped onto her bus. That night, as he sat alone in his giant living room, surrounded by silence, he thought about her words. For the first time in years, he wondered if maybe he had missed out on something important while chasing success. Meanwhile, Lily's mother, Mrs. Wilson, began noticing the changes too. She would sometimes watch from the window as her daughter skipped happily beside the tall, serious man. At first, she worried. After all, Mr. Harris had a reputation for being cold and unapproachable. But seeing Lily's smile each morning reassured her. She realized that her little girl had found a way to reach a man no one else could. The more Mr. Harris walked with Lily, the more he found himself softening. At the office, his employees noticed he was a little less harsh, a little more patient. Some even whispered that the boss seemed almost human lately. They didn't know why, but the reason was simple: every morning, a little girl reminded him that life was more than meetings and money. One evening, as he sat by his desk, going through numbers, he caught himself smiling. He wasn't smiling at the figures on the page, he was smiling at the memory of Lily skipping beside him, asking if he liked chocolate chip cookies. The truth was clear, though he still tried to resist it: Mr. Harris was changing. And it all began with a cheerful little girl who simply wanted someone to walk her to school. The walk soon became more than just small moments. What began as a reluctant favor turned into something like a routine. Every morning, Lily would look toward the tall gate of Mr. Harris's mansion, waiting eagerly to see him step outside. And more often than not, he did. At first, he still carried his phone in his hand, busy checking emails or responding to work messages. But as the days passed, he noticed that he was putting his phone away when he saw Lily waiting. Somehow, hearing her voice seemed more important than reading another line of numbers. Lily's chatter filled the quiet streets. She talked about everything from the silly joke her teacher told in class to the way her best friend braids her hair during recess. She told him about the school library and how she was learning to read big books with difficult words. "Do you know how to spell hippopotamus?" she asked one morning. "Yes," he answered with his usual short tone. "Show me," she insisted. Without realizing it, he spelled the long word out loud. Lily clapped her hands and laughed. "Wow, you're really smart." Mr. Harris tried to hide the small smile tugging at his lips. He was used to board members praising his decisions or reporters writing about his intelligence in business articles. But hearing genuine admiration from a child felt completely different, so innocent, so pure. Each day, their walks grew longer. At first, he stopped at the corner. Then, a week later, he walked her halfway. Soon, he found himself walking her all the way to school. The teachers at the school gate began noticing the unusual pair: the tall, serious man in his expensive suit walking beside a cheerful little girl with her tiny backpack. At the office, his assistant noticed changes too. Mr. Harris, who was always impatient in the mornings, suddenly arrived with a calmer expression. He was still strict, but not as sharp. When people asked what was different, he brushed the question aside. But deep inside, he knew the answer: his mornings with Lily were softening him. One morning, while they walked, Lily asked, "Why don't you smile more? Smiling makes you look nice." He was taken aback. "I don't have much to smile about," he said honestly. "Yes, you do," she replied confidently. "You get to walk with me." He actually laughed at that. A real laugh, not the stiff chuckle he sometimes forced at business dinners. And Lily laughed too, her laughter ringing out like music. That sound stayed with him the entire day, even during the longest meeting. Soon, their conversations became a little deeper. Lily, being curious, often asked about his life. "What did you like to do when you were little?" she asked one morning. He hesitated. "I read books. And I studied a lot." "That sounds boring," she said honestly. He raised an eyebrow, unused to anyone daring to call him boring. But Lily continued, "Didn't you play games? Didn't you climb trees or play tag?" "No," he said quietly. "I didn't have time for that." Lily's face fell for a moment. Then she smiled and said, "Well, you can play with me sometime. I'll teach you." The suggestion was so simple, yet it struck him in a way nothing else could. No one had invited him to play in decades. Their bond didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors who once saw Mr. Harris as cold and unapproachable began whispering about how different he seemed with the little girl. Some smiled at the sight, others were surprised, but everyone agreed that something unusual was happening. Even Mrs. Wilson, Lily's mother, was amazed. At first, she had been cautious. But seeing the way her daughter skipped happily beside Mr. Harris each morning reassured her. She began to see him not just as the grumpy millionaire next door, but as a man who, beneath his strict exterior, had a softer side waiting to be discovered. One Saturday morning, Lily knocked on his door. Mr. Harris, usually undisturbed on weekends, was surprised to see her standing there with a drawing in her hand. "I made this for you," she said proudly. It was a colorful picture of the two of them walking to school, with flowers and birds drawn around them. For a moment, Mr. Harris didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to receiving gifts, at least not gifts given with such innocence. Most gifts in his world were tokens of business deals or polite exchanges. This was different. This was real. "Thank you," he said softly, taking the drawing. He placed it carefully on his desk, where it stayed, reminding him every day of the small girl who was unknowingly changing his life. The walks began to influence his behavior in ways he didn't expect. One morning at work, he surprised his staff by asking about their families. He even listened patiently as one employee talked about her son's soccer game. Normally, he would have waved off such conversations as a waste of time, but now he found himself genuinely interested. His employees noticed the change, and though they didn't understand it, they welcomed it. Meanwhile, Lily continued to treat him like a friend, not a millionaire, not a CEO, not someone powerful, just a neighbor who walked with her to school. That simple equality touched him more than he realized. One rainy morning, Lily wore a bright yellow raincoat and held a tiny umbrella. As they walked, she splashed in puddles, giggling. Mr. Harris, who always avoided puddles, found himself stepping into one by accident. Lily laughed so hard, he couldn't help but laugh too. It was a moment he would never forget. A man who had built his life on control, perfection, and seriousness found joy in something as simple as a splash in the rain. At home, his mansion no longer felt as empty. He would often sit at his desk, looking at Lily's drawing, and smile quietly to himself. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking only about profits, reports, or business strategies. He was thinking about a little girl who reminded him of life's simple joys. Even the neighbors who once avoided him began to nod politely or greet him when he passed by. He wasn't the cold stranger anymore. He was becoming part of the community slowly, quietly, without even realizing it. One evening, as he sat by the window, he thought about his life. He had built an empire, earned respect, and collected wealth. Yet none of it had filled the emptiness he carried. Now, each morning walk with Lily brought him a sense of peace that money had never given him. He wondered how such a small child had managed to change his world. And though he didn't say it out loud, he knew the answer, because she saw him not as a CEO or a millionaire, but simply as a person. And that was enough to begin changing everything. One bright Tuesday morning, something unusual happened. Mr. Harris had a very important meeting scheduled with international investors. His morning was full of urgent calls, emails, and a pile of documents waiting for his approval. Normally, nothing could distract him when business demanded his full attention. But this morning, as he rushed to put on his suit and tie, he suddenly remembered Lily. For weeks now, walking her to school had become part of his life. Though he had never admitted it aloud, he had come to enjoy it. In fact, he looked forward to it. But that day, the meeting was too important, and he convinced himself that missing one walk would not matter. She'll understand, he thought quickly, straightening his tie and hurrying into his car. Meanwhile, Lily stood by the gate of her little house, waiting with her small backpack and her bright smile. At first, she looked toward the mansion next door, expecting to see Mr. Harris's tall figure step out as usual. Minutes passed, but no one came. She waited a little longer, her excitement slowly fading into disappointment. Finally, The school bus arrived, and she climbed on with a sigh, whispering to herself, maybe tomorrow. That day, Lily seemed quieter at school. Her teacher noticed she wasn't her usual cheerful self. She finished her work, but without her usual energy. To her, the morning felt incomplete. Back at the office, Mr. Harris sat through the meeting, answering questions and presenting his ideas. His colleagues admired his strong leadership, but deep inside, his mind kept wandering back to his neighborhood. In between presentations, he remembered Lily's small voice asking him to walk her. He tried to brush off the thought, but the guilt stayed with him. He told himself, it's just a child. She'll be fine. But he knew that wasn't entirely true. The following morning, when he stepped outside, Lily was there waiting. But this time, her smile was smaller. You didn't come yesterday, she said softly. Mr. Harris felt a pang in his chest. He wasn't used to being held accountable for such simple things. In business, if he missed a call, people understood. If he was late, assistants made excuses for him. But with this little girl, there was no excuse. She was too honest, too pure to accept anything but the truth. I had a meeting, he explained carefully. Lily looked at him for a moment, then said quietly, I waited. Those two words stayed with him. He walked with her that morning, but he didn't say much. Inside, he was thinking about how much trust she had placed in him and how easily he had broken it by missing just one walk. Later that week, another incident happened that shook him even more. One morning, Mrs. Wilson was late getting ready for work, and Lily had to walk part of the way to school by herself. Usually, she wasn't afraid, but as she tried to cross a busy street, a car honked loudly, startling her. A kind stranger nearby helped her across safely, but she arrived at school shaken. When Mrs. Wilson found out, her heart nearly stopped. That evening, she walked over to Mr. Harris's mansion. He was surprised to see her at his door, as they had only exchanged polite greetings before. Mr. Harris, she said gently, I just want to thank you. Ever since you started walking with Lily, she's been happier. You've given her something I couldn't. She trusts you. Her voice trembled a little. But today, when you weren't there, she had a little scare on the way to school. Please don't misunderstand me, I'm not blaming you. I know you're busy. But I need you to understand that, to her, your presence means more than you realize. Mr. Harris stood there silently, his heart heavy. For years, he had been known as a man who built empires, a man who made millions, a man whose decisions shaped businesses. But at that moment, he realized that none of it compared to the responsibility of being important in a child's life. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying Mrs. Wilson's words in his mind, she trusts you. He thought about how rarely people truly trusted him. Most respected him, many feared him, but few trusted him in a personal, human way. And yet, this small girl had given him her trust so easily just by holding his hand on the way to school. The next morning, when he stepped outside, Lily was already waiting. This time, he smiled first. Shall we? He asked, holding out his hand. Her face lit up instantly, and she skipped happily beside him. From that day forward, he made himself a promise. No matter how busy he was, no matter what meetings waited for him, he would always make time to walk with Lily. Even if it was just a short walk, even if it meant waking up earlier or rearranging his schedule, he would be there. Slowly, the ritual became more than just a walk. Some mornings, he carried her backpack when it looked too heavy. Other times, he stopped with her to watch the birds or admire a colorful garden along the way. He even started bringing her little surprises like a shiny pen for school or a small notebook for her drawings. The neighbors noticed how much he had changed. The once grumpy man now walked with a lighter step, sometimes even laughing along with the child. People who used to avoid him began greeting him warmly. Some even whispered about how much softer his face looked, as though years of stress had started to melt away. At his office, his employees noticed too. He was still firm and professional, but he no longer barked at them for small mistakes. He listened more, even smiled during meetings. They couldn't understand what had brought about such a change, but they welcomed it. One afternoon, when Mrs. Wilson saw him and Lily walking back from the park, she approached him. "I don't know what you've done," she said with a grateful smile, "but you've given my daughter something wonderful. And I think, you've found something wonderful too." Mr. Harris nodded quietly. He knew she was right. He had discovered something that all his wealth had never given him: connection, warmth, and a sense of belonging. And it had all started with a simple request from a little girl: "Will you walk me to school?" The weeks turned into months, and the morning walks between Mr. Harris and Lily became a part of life that no one in the neighborhood questioned anymore. What had once seemed odd, such a serious, wealthy man walking beside a cheerful little girl, was now one of the most heartwarming sights people looked forward to seeing. For Mr. Harris, the walks were no longer a duty or a strange routine. They had become something he cherished deeply. Each morning, when he stepped outside and saw Lily waiting with her backpack, his heart lifted. It was a kind of happiness he had never known before. He had built his career on being strong, controlled, and distant. That was how he had survived the ruthless world of business. But with Lily, he didn't need to be a CEO, or a millionaire, or the man with all the answers. He only needed to be Mr. Harris, the neighbor who walked her to school. One morning, as they walked down the familiar street, Lily began humming a tune. Then she started singing softly, her small voice filling the air. Mr. Harris listened quietly. He couldn't remember the last time someone had sung beside him. After a while, she looked up at him and asked, "Do you know this song?" He shook his head. "No, I don't." "I'll teach you," she said brightly. And just like that, the grumpy businessman found himself repeating lines of a children's song. He felt slightly embarrassed, but Lily laughed and clapped, and her joy was so contagious that he ended up laughing too. The change in him didn't go unnoticed. At the office, his employees were stunned by his lighter mood. He still worked hard and expected the best, but he no longer snapped at them for small errors. He even started taking a little time to ask about their families. Some of them whispered that perhaps their boss had finally learned how to smile. One Friday afternoon, after another successful meeting, Mr. Harris sat at his desk looking at Lily's drawing that still sat in a frame. It showed the two of them walking together, surrounded by flowers and birds. He smiled to himself and thought, "This picture means more to me than any award I've ever received." That weekend, Lily and her mother invited him to dinner. At first, he hesitated. He had never been to a neighbor's house for a casual meal. His dinners were usually with clients at expensive restaurants, with crystal glasses and fine dishes. But when Lily begged, "Please, Mr. Harris. Mommy makes the best pasta," he found himself agreeing. When he walked into their small but cozy home, he was struck by how warm it felt. The smell of home-cooked food filled the air, and the walls were decorated with family photos and Lily's colorful drawings. Mrs. Wilson welcomed him kindly, and Lily proudly pulled him to the dining table. Throughout the evening, he listened to their laughter, joined in their conversations, and for the first time in years, felt like he truly belonged. There was no pressure, no competition, no expectations, just simple kindness. When he left that night, he realized that his mansion, though large and full of luxury, had always felt empty because it lacked what this small house had: love. The days continued, and the bond between him and Lily grew stronger. Sometimes, he would surprise her by bringing a storybook and reading it to her after school. Other times, she would draw pictures for him to keep on his desk. Neighbors often smiled as they saw the once isolated millionaire sitting on the porch of the Wilsons' small house, listening to Lily's endless stories. One morning, as they walked, Lily looked up at him and asked, "Mr. Harris, are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Finally, he said softly, "Yes. I think I am." She grinned. "Good. Because happy people live longer." Her simple wisdom made him chuckle, but it also made him think. He realized that for most of his life, he had been chasing success, believing that happiness would come once he had enough wealth. Yet here he was, happier than he had ever been, not because of money, but because of a child's trust and friendship. The turning point came when one of his old friends from the city visited him. They sat in the grand living room of his mansion, and the friend looked around in amazement. "You've done well, Harris," the man said. "But tell me, don't you get lonely in this big place?" Mr. Harris smiled. "Not anymore," he replied, thinking of Lily and her mother. It was true. He no longer felt the emptiness that used to haunt him. His life, once filled only with business meetings and silent evenings, now had laughter, color, and warmth. The neighborhood, too, had changed its opinion of him. Parents who once warned their children to stay away from the grumpy man now greeted him warmly. Children waved at him, knowing he wasn't scary anymore. He was no longer just the CEO millionaire. He was Mr. Harris, the neighbor, the friend, the man who walked a little girl to school every morning. One sunny spring morning, Lily skipped beside him, holding his hand tightly. She looked up at him with her usual bright smile and said, "You know, Mr. Harris, when I grow up, I want to be kind like you." Her words nearly brought tears to his eyes. Kind. No one had ever used that word for him before. In his world, he had been called powerful, intelligent, successful, but never kind. And yet, from the mouth of a child, that word felt like the highest honor he could ever receive. From then on, Mr. Harris made it his mission not only to be successful in business but also to live with kindness. He supported community projects, helped the local school with supplies, and even sponsored scholarships for children. But through it all, he never missed the simple ritual that had changed his life: the morning walks with Lily. Because for him, those walks were more than just a routine. They were a reminder of what truly mattered. They were proof that even the coldest heart could be warmed by the trust of a child. And they were the reason he had discovered a kind of happiness he had never thought possible. And so, what began with a little girl's innocent question, "Will you walk me to school?" became the beginning of a new chapter in the life of a man who had once believed he needed nothing but success. In truth, all he had ever needed was connection, laughter, and the courage to let his heart be touched.